Good morning. A few seconds later, so this morning I went to find Facebook on my phone to open it up, and my phone had an update put on it overnight, and my icons are moved around on my screen. So I thought, well, where in the world did it go? Well, I found you. So anyway, today we look at Ezekiel 20 and 21. And chapter 20, I don't know, either the last verse of 19 or the first verse of 20 this is a lamentation, and it is used as a lamentation. But so it's there, and it's a little bit separated from each of them. But chapter 20 begins with a very specific date again. In the 7th year, the 5th month, on the 10th day of the month. And then in my footnote, that says that that's August 14th of 591 BC. So I mean, their months were different than ours, and they had a different calendar than what we use today. But they set this on, again, a very specific day that this word of the Lord comes, because this group of elders, again, comes to Ezekiel. And it says that this certain elders came to consult the Lord and sat down before me. And then the word of the Lord came to him. And I just continue to be amazed at the way God works in and through these prophets in the Old Testament, and how, when these people come to him, and it's just like with Hagar and Ishmael, and so often, that God is very evidently watching and paying attention to what's going on, and God shows up when people start looking for him. And I think that is really true yet today. When people really look for God, God is there. And sometimes we discount that as something else, but I really truly believe that God is active in the world today. Not in exactly the way he was in the Old Testament, and again, and through this part of the Old Testament, when the Israelites have been sinning and not listening to God, and God is very displeased with them. He's angry with them. He speaks to them through his prophets, and they continue to turn a deaf ear to God and to everything, and they continue to worship idols. And this is one of the things that God is most upset about. And in verse 13 of this chapter, God says, the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They didn't observe my laws, but rejected my ordinances. And then it says, and my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. God had in the 10 Commandments said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And there were many laws and rules concerning the Sabbath, but the biggest part of the Sabbath is for the good of you and me, so that we have this day of rest, of relaxation, of recuperation, of taking time out to remember who we are in relationship to who God is. And these Israelites, he says in here, God says to Ezekiel, they'll be traveling along and they get on a high place and they just worship to whatever. They're worshiping idols and people, the gods of other countries. And he reiterates and he talks about how he led them out of captivity in Egypt. And, he's reminding them of so many things. But yet they just don't hear. So this group of elders comes to consult the Lord. And, and God says, why are you coming? To consult me? As I live, I will not be consulted by you. Because they haven't been listening. Because they don't pay any attention to when he does speak and give them instruction through the prophet. And I don't know, are they expecting that God is going to speak right out loud to them so that they hear the words themselves rather than hearing the words come through the prophet Ezekiel? It's it should be very evident to them that Ezekiel is speaking for God. But God says, let them know the abominations of their ancestors, and how sinful they were, and how God had said because of this sinfulness, because of their idol worship and everything else, that none of the generation that had been freed from captivity in Egypt would see the promised land. So God is reminding them of that in here. And they continue to ignore. And so God is saying that you're not any different than they were. And that is very true today. We're still not a whole lot different in so many ways. In verse 18, God says, I said to their children in the wilderness, do not follow the statutes of your parents, nor observe their ordinances, nor defile yourselves with their idols. And it's get back to worshiping God. Get back to realizing who God is. Get back to living a right and righteous life, which is really hard. I understand that. But to hear God's laws. And every once in a while, pops up on Facebook or different places that, why do we need to have law books that are so thick and, thousands of pages? If we could only follow the 10 commands that God gave us, those 10 laws, we wouldn't really have any need for all of these other laws. But even in the Old Testament, all of those laws, you're reading through Leviticus especially, and Deuteronomy, those laws get expanded because people find loopholes in them, or they say, well, God didn't really mean. It's just like Satan questioning with Adam and Eve, and Satan tempting Jesus. Well, did God really mean that, or how did God mean that? And so we continue to work to try to find loopholes in all of these different things that way. God just continues to encourage them. But throughout all of this, when God is talking about the Sabbath and how they greatly profaned it, is that the observance of the Sabbath became less and less and less. And do we see that in today's society? Yes. Everything that used to, every blue law that they called them, that protected the workers and so many different people that way have been changed and readapted. And it used to be that stores had to close at midnight on Saturday night, but then, well, okay, now we can open at noon, or but then, well, we can have restaurants and gas stations open, and earlier in the morning. They can open at, say, 6 or 7. But now, they really don't have to close at all. They're 24/7, 365, except for they might close for Thanksgiving or Christmas, at least for a few hours. But the observance of faith, the observance of belief in God has gotten to be just an afterthought for so many. And it's really sad to see that in so many ways. That, our treatment of the Sabbath isn't any better than it was, so long ago. And, God, but yet, as we get into like verses, starting at verse 33, there's this switch in God again. He's not pointing out their sins. He's not pointing out how badly they've fallen away. But yet he says, I will bring you into the wilderness of people. I will enter judgment, and I will purge the rebels among you, and I will preserve a remnant. And, so there's still, even within all of this displeasure that God has, there is always a promise of hope for this remnant that will come. And that they will, verse 40, from my holy mountain, the Lord says, all the house of Israel, they shall serve me in the land, and there I will accept them. And there I will, so again, there's that promise of restoration. But then again, we're going to see how how God extracts vengeance against others. One of the headers up on the top of my page says, the drawn sword of God. So, God is meting out justice as God sees. And, in verse 20 especially, the word of the Lord came and says, mortal prophesy, say this, a sword is sharpened, it's polished, it's sharpened for slaughter, honed to flash like lightning. So God's judgment will come. And that's this Sunday is the first Sunday in Advent, and always the first Sunday in Advent. Every year of the 3-year lectionary, the first Sunday of Advent, the text is apocalyptic, looking at end times. And end times, the judgment comes, and all of that. And this is, the God comes out against the enemies of Israel. But yet it's always in there that, when you don't follow me, I won't protect you. I mean, and it's just so hard, because chapter 21 ends with horrible words to me. You shall be remembered no more, for I, the Lord, have spoken. However, we know that God does remember. God does remember.